The dawn broke over Georgia like a slow-burning fever, spilling gold and dust across the plantation. The first sound to rise from the fields was not birdsong, but the groaning of wood and the shuffle of bare feet. The day had begun, and with it came the weight, the unbearable, daily burden of Mrs. Dorothea Vance. From the grand veranda of the big house, she emerged a figure of grotesque grandeur wrapped in satin and lace that strained against her swollen body. The boards creaked in protest under her feet. Her face, pale and powdered, seemed carved from lard and pride. She moved slowly, each step deliberate, as if expecting the world to shift beneath her in courtesy. Behind her trailed a young maid carrying a silver tray laden with figs and a crystal decanter of sweet tea. "Bring out my chair," Dorothea commanded. Her voice had the thick drawl of the South, the kind that made cruelty sound almost like music. 6 slaves waited in the yard. They stood in a rigid line, eyes lowered, sweat already glistening on their necks though the morning was barely born. Before them rested the chair, a monstrous construction of wood and iron, padded with faded velvet. Its frame widened again and again to bear the growing mass of its mistress. It was less a seat and more a throne of humiliation. At the front stood Jonas, the oldest of them, his back a map of old scars, his arms knotted with sinew. Beside him, the newcomers Isaac, young and quiet, Martha, small but strong, and the others whose names history never bothered to keep waited in silence. Dorothea descended the steps like a queen greeting her subjects. The scent of rose oil drifted with her, mingling with the stench of sweat and soil. "Lift me," she said simply. No one moved at first. Creighton, the overseer, shifted on his horse, letting the whip coil lazily in his hand. That was enough. Jonas bent first, his fingers gripping the worn handles, and the others followed, their bodies folding like reeds in the wind. When they lifted, the world seemed to groan. The chair rose from the ground, ropes straining, wood creaking. Dorothea settled into it with a sigh of satisfaction, adjusting her parasol to block the sun from her powdered cheeks. "Smoothly, now," she murmured. "A lady must glide." The carriers began their march down the dirt path, bare feet pressing into the red clay. Dust rose around them in small clouds, sticking to their skin. The air was thick and wet, heavy with the smell of pine and decay. Dorothea watched her fields as though they were her kingdom. "See how fine the cotton grows," she said, fanning herself. "It's my doing, every last inch of it. They work harder when I watch." Jonas kept his eyes on the ground, but his mind wandered back to when he was young and strong enough to hate openly. Now, his hatred had aged into silence. Isaac, walking behind him, felt each tremor of the chair in his shoulders. The wood bit into his hands, his muscles screaming under the strain. He was new to this place, traded weeks ago from another plantation after his master's debt swallowed him whole. He had heard rumors of Dorothea, the obese widow who made her slaves carry her like royalty, but seeing her now, the truth felt heavier than the chair itself. They passed the workers in the fields, heads bowed, hands moving in rhythm through the cotton. Dorothea waved lazily, like a monarch acknowledging loyal subjects. The sight burned into Isaac's mind. "Hold steady!" Creighton barked, his horse kicking dust into their faces. "Her ladyship don't like to sway." Jonas gritted his teeth, adjusting his grip. His breath came short. He could feel Martha's trembling behind him, hear the soft sob she tried to hide in the rhythm of footsteps. Dorothea reached for a sugared fig, bit into it, and let the syrup run down her chin. She murmured. "Carry me closer to the river. I like the breeze there." The order meant another mile of agony. As they turned toward the hill, the sun climbed higher, and the heat became unbearable. The earth beneath their feet shimmered. Dorothea hummed an old church tune, out of tune and slow, her voice breaking the air like a sermon twisted by vanity. Isaac felt something strange, then not anger. Not yet, but the faint stir of rebellion buried deep inside his chest. It wasn't words or thoughts, just a tightening, a pulse. He looked to Jonas, whose eyes stayed fixed forward, hollow but alive. By the time they reached the river, sweat poured down their faces, dripping into the dust. Dorothea leaned back in pleasure, her smile soft and cruel. "Ah, now this is peace," she said. "A fine morning for a lady to be carried." No one replied. The only answer was the sound of wood groaning and hearts beating beneath the unbearable burden of flesh. The sun rose higher, The air thickened, and the world, for one long, suffocating moment, seemed to exist solely for her comfort. They carried her on bodies trembling, eyes down, souls silent, but something unseen began to shift beneath the surface of their obedience. It was only the beginning. By late morning the sun had turned merciless. The Georgia heat pressed down with the weight of judgment itself, smothering every breath beneath its burning sky. The dust hung thick, clinging to sweat-slicked backs, coating throats and lungs. For the 6 slaves carrying Mrs. Dorothea Vance, the world had narrowed to pain, breath, and rhythm, the slow, punishing cadence of her procession. Every day she demanded it. Her chair, enormous and ornate, gleamed with fresh white paint, though no polish could hide the scars of strain etched into its frame. The ropes were new, the bodies beneath them were not. They had carried her through storm and drought, through sickness and sun, through humiliation too familiar to name. Dorothea called it her daily inspection. She said it reminded the workers who she was. Power must be visible, she liked to say, else it fades. From the balcony of the big house, her servants and guests sometimes watched the parade begin, fanning themselves as though witnessing a fine performance. Creighton, the overseer, always led the procession on horseback, his whip looped lazily in his hand. Behind him came the carriers, Jonas, Isaac, Martha, and the rest bearing her weight as they crossed the fields. Dorothea sat upright on her throne, her parasol angled perfectly above her pale face, shielding her from the sun that scorched the backs of those below. Her lace gloves were spotless, her cheeks glowed faintly pink with heat. Every few minutes she lifted a perfumed handkerchief to dab the moisture from her upper lip. "Slower," she murmured, though their pace was already torturous. "Grace is never hurried." Her voice floated down like poison wrapped in silk. The carriers obeyed without reply. The chair swayed slightly, its shadow moving over the red earth like the passage of a cloud. They passed the cotton rows where men and women stooped under the lash of labor. The workers paused to bow their heads as Dorothea drifted by. She acknowledged them with a faint smile, the kind that mistook fear for reverence. "They look up to me," she said to Creighton, who nodded automatically. Jonas, at the front left, stumbled once when the dirt dipped unevenly. The chair tilted. Dorothea's eyes flashed. "Careful," she snapped, voice cracking like the whip that hadn't yet struck. Jonas caught himself, breath shuddering through clenched teeth. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. The word ma'am tasted like blood. Creighton turned his horse, his expression cold. "Don't test her patience, old man." He flicked the whip in the air, not to hit, but to remind. The sound was worse than pain itself. Isaac, walking beside Jonas, felt every vibration of that whip crack ripple through him. The sweat in his eyes burned. He wanted to lift his head, to look at the face of the woman who sat above them all, but he didn't. Looking up was dangerous here. Still, he could see her shadow swaying, heavy and soft, framed by the bright flare of her parasol. Each movement was a punishment, each breath a debt. They reached the sugar sheds, where the smell of boiled cane clung to the air. Dorothea ordered them to stop. "I'll have a rest," she said, and waved her fan gently. The carriers froze, their legs trembling, arms shaking under her weight. Creighton dismounted, offering her a glass of chilled cider from the basket tied to his saddle. Dorothea sipped, sighed, and smiled faintly. "Such fine weather," she said. "I do think the Lord favors us today." Isaac's vision swam, his muscles burned. He could feel Martha's shallow breaths behind him. The wooden beams dug into their shoulders, but none dared to shift their stance. Dorothea dabbed her lips and looked out over the fields. So many hands, so much order. My late husband would be proud. She smiled to herself, unaware or perhaps indifferent to the tremors in the bodies beneath her. "You know, Creighton, I sometimes think God gives certain souls strength only to serve." Creighton chuckled. "And some to be served." She laughed, a soft, rolling sound that made Isaac's stomach twist. When she finished her drink, she gestured lazily. "Carry on." They lifted her again. The ropes bit deeper, cutting new burns into calloused flesh. The chair swayed forward, through the orchard, past the drying racks, toward the river where the reflection of her parasol shimmered on the water. "Stop by the magnolia," Dorothea said. "I like the scent." They stopped. She inhaled deeply, fanning herself again. "Magnolias," she said dreamily. "They remind me of purity. Don't you agree, Creighton? Creighton nodded again. Jonas stared straight ahead, jaw locked. Beneath the chair, his mind replayed every insult, every whip mark, every morning of humiliation stretched over years. He could feel Isaac watching him, though neither spoke. The silence between them held something unspoken, something that pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the rhythm of footsteps. After another hour, Dorothea declared she was ready to return. "We'll take the long way," she said. "The breeze by the ridge is pleasant." Isaac almost stumbled at the words. The ridge meant another half-mile of steep incline. His legs were already quivering, his throat dry as ash. Still, no one protested. The climb began. The sun was a burning eye in the sky. Creighton rode slowly beside them, humming. Dorothea chewed on candied fruit from a silver tin. Each crunch echoed in Isaac's ears like thunder. At the top of the ridge, Dorothea leaned forward, gazing at her land, the endless stretch of white cotton and green cane rolling to the horizon. "Beautiful," she whispered, "all mine." Her words hung in the still air. For a moment, the carriers stood silent. The chair balanced precariously, the earth shifting beneath their tired feet. Then Creighton said, "Let's move, folks," and the moment passed. They descended slowly toward the house. By the time they reached the front steps again, the sky had turned molten gold. Dorothea gestured for them to kneel, and they did, lowering the chair to the earth as gently as if it held a child. She rose, puffing, her massive form unsteady. "Very good," she said, brushing invisible dust from her gown. "You carried me well today." No one replied. Creighton smiled. "They aim to please, Mum." Dorothea turned, looking down at them, their bent backs, their heaving chests, their eyes fixed on the ground. "They should," she said softly. "It's their purpose." And with that, she waddled up the steps and vanished inside, leaving the smell of rose oil and sugar in her wake. The carriers stood for a moment, unmoving. The world seemed to tilt back into silence. Jonas's hands trembled as he straightened. Isaac's shoulders throbbed. Martha bit her lip hard enough to draw blood. For the first time, Isaac allowed himself to look up at the house. The windows glowed faintly gold in the dying light. He saw her silhouette pass one, then disappear. He whispered under his breath, too low for anyone to hear, "One day." The others didn't ask what he meant, but Jonas heard the tone. And deep inside, something old and beaten began to stir. The great house loomed like a relic of pride, its white columns cracked by the sun and time. By afternoon, the air inside had grown thick with the scent of roses, tobacco, and sweat. Behind the walls, where laughter echoed faintly from polished halls, Mrs. Dorothea Vance held court over her empire of decay. From the outside, the mansion was beauty, symmetry, and grace, the illusion of gentility, but inside, rot bloomed behind the plaster. The velvet drapes were fading, the rugs threadbare beneath their polish. The slaves who cleaned the rooms had learned how to make decay look elegant, how to make a dying world appear untouched. Dorothea sat in the parlor, her massive form spilling across a velvet chaise. A crystal bowl of candied peaches rested near her elbow. The afternoon light cut through lace curtains, touching her powdered face in thin, trembling stripes. She dabbed at her forehead with a handkerchief scented in lavender and sugar. "More tea," she said. The servant girl, Elsie, barely 15, hurried to obey. The porcelain clattered as she poured, her hands shaking. "Careful," Dorothea snapped. "You spill, and I'll have Creighton remind you how to hold a pot properly." Elsie froze, nodded mutely, and withdrew her trembling hand. Dorothea took the cup with a satisfied hum. "Children these days," she said, sipping. "No grace, no poise. The world is turning slovenly." Her words floated upward, heavy as smoke. On the far wall, portraits of her ancestors stared down, stern men and pale women, painted in the same false dignity she wore. They seemed to watch her with disapproval, though perhaps that was just the play of light. Dorothea spoke to them sometimes half in jest, half in madness. "You'd be proud," she murmured now. "Your legacy breathes through me." A murmur of wind crept through the window seams, carrying faint sounds from the quarters outside, the rhythmic strike of hammers, the low hum of voices. The contrast between her world and theirs was as wide as heaven and hell, yet connected by every board, every breath. Creighton entered without knocking. "You wanted the ledger, ma'am?" She gestured lazily. Set it down. He did, opening the thick book on her table. Names, dates, weights, births, deaths, all recorded in neat, careful handwriting, the lives of dozens reduced to ink and column. Dorothea squinted, tracing a finger along the page. "Isaac," she said. "The new one. How's he settling?" "Well enough," Creighton said. "Quiet type. Strong. Good. Strong backs make faithful servants." She paused, then smirked. "He looks like he could carry a queen." Creighton chuckled softly, though uneasily. "He already does, Mom." Her laughter filled the room, soft at first, then rolling, too long, too loud. "Ah, yes," she said finally. "He does indeed." She reached for another peach slice, chewing slowly. The syrup glistened on her chin. Creighton watched her a moment longer. There were whispers, even among the white folk in town, of her temper, her appetite, her obsession with being seen. Some called her eccentric, others used harsher words, but Creighton had learned not to question a woman whose inheritance held the plantation's deeds. When he left, Dorothea turned her eyes toward the window again. The sunlight outside had turned copper. She could see faint figures moving through the fields, tiny dots bending, straightening, bending again. She found the sight soothing, almost musical. Her voice softened. "My father said a lady's worth is measured by what bows before her." She believed it. Every day reaffirmed that truth. Every back bent beneath her, every body trembling in silence, each one was a verse in her hymn of dominion. Evening came slow. The parlor glowed with candlelight. Dinner was served, platters of roasted duck, sweet corn pudding, and bread rolls glistening with butter. Dorothea ate alone, though she filled 2 plates. She drank wine until her breath grew thick and her words slurred into the empty room. Afterward, she called for music. The houseboy, Samuel, brought out her husband's old violin. His hands shook as he tuned it, for Dorothea's moods were unpredictable. "Something light," she said. "Something that makes me forget the heat." He began to play a trembling tune that wavered like smoke. Dorothea closed her eyes, swaying slightly. "Beautiful," she whispered. "You see, even in chains they can make beauty." "Isn't that remarkable?" Samuel said nothing. He only played until she waved him away. When the house fell quiet again, Dorothea moved toward the window, fanning herself. Outside, lightning flickered on the horizon, far beyond the fields. For a fleeting moment, her reflection in the glass merged with the dark landscape, her pale face hovering above the world she owned. She whispered to herself, "Let them sweat. Let them bleed. They are the roots, and I am the bloom." Her reflection smiled back. Downstairs, the kitchen buzzed softly. The cook and the maids spoke in hushed tones while washing dishes. "Did you see her today?" one whispered. "Made them carry her for hours. Lord, forgive her." "Lord, don't listen in that house," another murmured. "Not to her." The conversation ended when the floorboards creaked above them. Silence settled again, heavy and practiced. By the time Dorothea retired, the moon had climbed high. The halls smelled of beeswax and old perfume. Elsie followed behind, holding a candle and a basin of water. Dorothea undressed with slow, deliberate motions, folding her gown as if the act itself proved virtue. When Elsie approached to help, she waved her away. "You'll never understand refinement," she said. "You were born to serve it, not wear it." She lowered herself onto the feather bed with a sigh that rattled the silence. "Tomorrow," she said faintly, eyes already closing, "I think I'll have them carry me to the orchard. The scent there reminds me of heaven." Her breath thickened, turning to soft snores. The candlelight flickered. Elsie stood a moment, staring at the sleeping figure, the mountain of flesh draped in silk, the monster dreaming of grace. Then she blew out the candle and slipped quietly from the room. Down the hall, the walls seemed to whisper with the night wind. Somewhere beyond them, in the darkness of the slave quarters, other breaths stirred, restless, waiting. The house slept, but not all hearts within it did. Morning broke with a grey silence. The plantation, still damp from the night's storm, smelled of mud and magnolia rot. The sun rose behind the trees, pale and reluctant, casting a dull shimmer over the broken fences and waterlogged fields. In the slave quarters, a dozen men and women stirred awake before the horn sounded. Their bodies moved like clockwork, though their minds drifted elsewhere back to the small hours of the night when they whispered beneath leaking roofs about things they could never say aloud in daylight. Isaac sat at the doorway of his shack, sharpening the edge of a hoe with slow, careful motions. His face caught the dim light, hard and unreadable. The blade hissed against the whetstone, a rhythm that steadied his breathing. He had slept little. His dreams had been full of noise chains clinking, Dorothea's laughter, the sound of something falling but never breaking. He looked across the yard where the other carriers stood, stretching their arms, rolling shoulders that had known her weight too many times. There were 4 of them in all: Isaac, Jonah, Caleb, and Ben. Each man carried scars on his back like invisible maps of endurance. Jonah muttered under his breath, "You see her yesterday? Made us carry her clear to the far fence and back. Ain't no reason but her own devil pride." Caleb spat into the mud. "She wants to be God. But even God don't weigh that much." A few laughed quietly, a bitter sort of laugh that ended quick when Creighton's voice rang out from the big house porch. "You 4. Front yard, now." The men exchanged glances. The day had begun. Dorothea waited in her chair beneath the veranda, dressed in a gown of blue silk that strained against her figure. A wide-brimmed hat shaded her face, though not enough to hide the puffiness around her eyes. She had drunk too much again, though her voice carried the same imperious sharpness. "You'll carry me to the orchard," she said. "The air in this house is foul." Creighton nodded to the men. "Lift her careful." They took their places, 2 at the front, 2 behind. The chair creaked under her as they hoisted it up, and Dorothea fanned herself lazily, already scolding. "Mind the tilt, Isaac. I can feel it." "Yes, ma'am," he said. The ground squelched beneath their feet. Each step was measured, their shoulders straining against the poles that supported her cushioned seat. The air was thick, the humidity clinging like sweat made visible. Cicadas shrieked from the trees. Dorothea hummed a hymn as they moved, her voice trembling on the high notes. "Shall we gather at the river?" The men said nothing. They only kept walking. Halfway to the orchard, a wheelbarrow lay overturned in the path. Jonah's boots slipped in the mud, nearly sending the chair listing. Dorothea shrieked, "Watch your footing, you oaf!" Jonah gritted his teeth but held steady. Isaac's eyes flicked toward him, wordless warning, wordless calm. The tension snapped invisible across them like wire. When they reached the orchard edge, Dorothea ordered them to stop beneath the old pecan tree. Its branches spread wide, casting soft shade. She inhaled deeply, as if the world itself existed to perfume her lungs. "Set me down," she said. They did. Her chair settled into the damp grass. For a long moment, she said nothing, only stared at the sky through half-lidded eyes. The storm had broken branches here and there. Fruit lay crushed in the dirt. "How pitiful," she murmured. "Even nature has lost its discipline." Caleb glanced at Isaac, a silent question in his eyes. Isaac shook his head faintly. "Not yet." Dorothea lifted her parasol. "Fetch my tea set," she said to Creighton, who stood nearby, "and tell the cook to send those little cakes. I like the ones with almond paste." Creighton bowed stiffly and left. When he was gone, the orchard grew quieter. Only the wind moved, shaking droplets from the leaves. Dorothea's breathing deepened. Her face glistened with sweat, though she fanned herself faster. "You think I don't see the way you look at me?" she said suddenly. Isaac frowned. "Ma'am? Your eyes are too bold. You think I don't notice? You and the others whisper when I pass." Her mouth curled into something almost like a smile. "You think I don't hear?" Isaac's jaw tightened. "We don't mean no harm, ma'am." "No harm," she echoed softly, then chuckled. "Do you know, Isaac, I once dreamed of being carried through Paris. Real men, handsome ones, lifting me like royalty through the streets. I've had to make do with less." Jonah looked away, biting down on anger that burned behind his silence. Dorothea leaned forward slightly, the chair creaking beneath her. "But I do enjoy the power," she whispered. "Every step you take, every breath you spend beneath me, it's mine." She pressed a gloved hand to her chest and smiled as if savoring the thought. "Do you ever wonder what it feels like to command bodies like that? To be worshipped, even in hate?" No one answered. The orchard wind seemed to pause. Dorothea sighed. "Of course you don't. You were born to bear it, not understand it." The parasol tilted. She closed her eyes and let her head rest back against the chair. "Leave me here a while," she murmured. "I'll call when I've had enough." Creighton returned then, carrying the silver tray. He set it beside her, poured tea, then looked to the men. "You heard her. Wait close, but out of sight." They stepped back into the shadows of the orchard. From where they stood, they could see her, the enormous shape framed by sunlight and green, sipping tea like a queen in a painting. But in the stillness between her movements, something fragile showed. The way her hands trembled when she lifted the cup, the way her breath hitched when she thought no one watched. "She's cracking," Jonah whispered. Isaac said nothing. He watched a beetle crawl over the broken fruit near his boot. "Even rot starts small," he said quietly. Caleb looked up at the sky. "Then maybe it's near done." They waited. The afternoon deepened. Dorothea began to doze, her chin sinking toward her chest. Creighton had gone back to the house for more wine, muttering about her endless demands. The men stood motionless. Only the sound of cicadas filled the orchard. When Dorothea's head finally slumped and her teacup slipped from her grasp, spilling into the grass, Isaac stepped forward. The chair creaked softly as he checked her breathing, still alive, but shallow. He looked at the others. Their eyes met, holding something wordless between them, a recognition, a patience ripening into something else. "Not yet," Isaac said again, "but soon." Behind them, thunder rolled again in the distance, faint but steady. The cracks beneath the weight had begun to spread. By the next morning, the sky had changed its mind. Clouds hung low and bruised, pressing over the land like a promise that couldn't be withdrawn. The air was heavy with that strange stillness that comes before a downpour, thick, waiting, electric. Isaac woke early. Sleep had given him no rest, only fragments of thought that gnawed like insects. He sat at the edge of his cot, rubbing the ache in his wrists where rope burns from carrying the chair had darkened his skin. The sound of distant thunder rolled through the dawn, soft and patient. From outside came the shuffle of feet and quiet voices. The others were stirring too. Jonah was already by the fire pit, coaxing flames from damp kindling. "Storm's gonna hit hard," he muttered. "Ground soft already. Ain't no way she gonna want to be carried today." Caleb gave a short, humorless laugh. "You think that'll stop her?" Jonah said nothing more. When the horn sounded from the main house, they all turned their eyes to it. No one moved right away. The sound was shrill, echoing through the mist. Another call followed, shorter, sharper. Isaac rose. "Let's go," he said. They made their way through the muddy yard, the smell of wet earth thick around them. Each step squelched. The plantation dogs barked from their pens, sensing the tension in the air. Dorothea was waiting under the portico again, draped in a new gown, white this time, too tight at the seams, clinging to her swollen frame. Her hat was pinned high, her face pale under a layer of powder that streaked from sweat. She was breathing harder than usual. "I will not be kept indoors by weather," she said. "The orchard is lovely when it rains." Creighton hesitated. "Ma'am, it might not be safe." "The grounds—" "I said I wish to go," she snapped. Her eyes cut toward the men assembling the carrying rig. "Well, do you mean to make me wait all morning?" Isaac bowed slightly. "No, ma'am." They lifted her, the wood groaning beneath her weight. The first raindrops began to fall, slow, fat, deliberate. By the time they reached the edge of the veranda, it was raining in earnest. The sky flashed white for a moment, thunder following like a closing door. Dorothea tilted her head back, smiling faintly as the wind caught her hat. "Glorious," she murmured. "Even the heavens bow when I step out." Her words were swallowed by the storm. The path toward the orchard had turned to mud. Every step sent water splashing up their legs, every footfall sinking deeper than the last. The men said nothing, but their breathing grew ragged. Dorothea fanned herself with a lace fan that quickly soaked through, her face glistening. "Careful," she barked. "You're leaning again." Lightning split the sky, and for an instant the orchard ahead glowed in stark silver. The trees looked skeletal, their branches writhing in the wind. "Keep moving," she demanded. "Faster." Jonah's jaw locked. "Ground's too slick, Mum. I don't care. You'll do as you're told." They struggled forward, slipping, grunting, adjusting their grip as her weight pressed harder with every lurch. Dorothea's laughter rose above the storm, wild, almost gleeful. "See? The world bends but doesn't break," she cried, just as her words broke off in a cough. She waved her fan again, though it was useless now. Rain streaked her face, washing rivulets of powder down her cheeks. Her hair clung to her temples in limp curls. By the time they reached the first row of trees, thunder was crashing directly overhead. The sky had turned nearly black. They stopped briefly under a cluster of branches. "Set me down," she commanded, panting. "I need air." They obeyed. The chair sank slightly into the wet ground, one leg vanishing halfway into the mud. Dorothea didn't notice. She leaned back, chest heaving, the lace of her gown sticking to her neck. Creighton wiped his brow. "We should head back, Mom. It's getting worse." "No," she said sharply. "Not yet. Bring me wine. The red one." He hesitated, then turned back toward the house. When he was gone, silence crept between thunderclaps. The men stood still, raindrops sliding from their faces, their clothes plastered against their skin. Isaac's eyes flicked toward Dorothea. She looked less like a queen now, and more like a stranded creature, drenched and heavy, clutching at her fan as though it could hold back the storm. Jonah whispered, "She ain't built for this. Look at her." Isaac didn't answer. Dorothea caught her breath and spoke, her voice thin but sharp. "Don't whisper. It's rude." Jonah froze. She smiled faintly. "You think I don't see everything, even through rain?" The wind howled through the trees. Her parasol snapped from her hand and went tumbling across the orchard. Dorothea let out a low sound of annoyance. "Fetch that," she ordered. None of them moved. "I said fetch it." Still, no one moved. The storm pressed around them, loud and relentless. Isaac stepped closer, his face unreadable beneath the sheets of rain. "Mom," he said quietly, "maybe it's time we rest." Her eyes narrowed. "You forget your place." "I remember it too well," he replied. The air between them went still. For a moment, the only sound was the rain hammering against leaves and wood. Then Dorothea's lips curled. "You'll regret that tone." Isaac said nothing. Behind him, Jonah shifted his grip on the carrying pole. Caleb's gaze darted between them. The tension hung there, fragile as glass. Then, faintly, from the distance, Creighton's voice calling out, half lost in the wind, "Stay where you are. The bridge by the creek's gone out." No one answered him. Dorothea looked around, blinking water from her eyes. "What did he say?" Isaac stepped back. "Said the bridge is gone." She frowned. "Then we'll go the long way back. You'll carry me around." Jonah's voice came low, almost a growl. "That'll take an hour through mud like this." Dorothea's head snapped toward him. "You'll take as long as I say you'll take." The storm's fury grew. Thunder rolled like cannon fire. For the first time, a trace of fear crossed her face. She tried to wave it off, but her hand trembled. "Lift me," she said. "Now." Isaac glanced at the others. Their eyes met through the sheets of rain. Something unspoken passed between them, a realization born not of anger, but exhaustion. Still, they obeyed. They lifted her again, her body swaying as they pushed through the sucking mud. Every step sank deeper. The poles creaked, the chair groaned, their muscles screamed. Dorothea shouted over the storm, "Don't you dare falter! Do you hear me?" Lightning flashed, and in that instant, Isaac saw Jonah's expression hollow, resolute. Dorothea screamed again as the chair tilted. "Stop, steady yourselves." No one did. They kept walking, slower, heavier, until the ground gave way beneath one foot, then another. Mud clutched their boots like hands. Dorothea shrieked, clutching the arms of the chair, "Hold me up! Hold me!" The next flash of lightning blinded them all. Thunder exploded overhead. The poles slipped. Her scream was swallowed by the storm. The chair crashed sideways into the mud. Wood splintered. A plume of rain and earth rose up around her. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then she began to wail a deep, furious sound, more beast than woman. Isaac stood over her, breathing hard. She clawed at the ground, trying to rise, her gown sodden, her hair plastered to her face. "Help me!" she shrieked. No one moved. Her eyes darted from face to face, confusion bleeding into rage. Then, something close to terror. "You," she gasped. "You dare." Lightning struck again, illuminating them all in violent white. Isaac turned away first. The others followed. Behind them, Dorothea's cries broke against the wind, swallowed by thunder. The storm gathered its full fury, then sheets of rain, howling wind, the sky splitting open above the plantation. The orchard shook, branches bending low. fruit torn from limbs. By the time Creighton returned, shouting her name, the men were gone, and the chair lay broken in the mud. The storm had taken her voice. The storm raged through the night, battering the plantation until the fields turned to rivers and the air itself felt bruised. Then, as dawn crept over the horizon, the rain stopped as abruptly as it had begun. A strange stillness fell, heavy and complete. The sky was pale gray, and the trees dripped quietly. The orchard looked like a battlefield, broken branches, torn fruit, and deep gouges in the mud where the chair had crashed. The air smelled of wet wood and something faintly metallic. Creighton was the first to find her. He came stumbling down the path just after sunrise, boots sinking deep in the muck. His coat clung to his back, soaked and torn. "Miss Dorothea," he called, voice cracking in the emptiness. There was no answer, only the rustle of wet leaves. When he reached the broken chair, he froze. The parasol lay beside it, half buried in the mud, its lace shredded. A smear of silk trailed toward the pecan tree. He followed it slowly, each step sinking deeper. Then he saw her. Dorothea lay sprawled against the tree trunk, her gown torn and soaked through, her skin caked in mud. One arm was bent beneath her, twisted awkwardly. Her face, once powdered and proud, was gray with rain and soil. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring past him into the washed-out sky. He dropped to his knees. "Ma'am, Miss Dorothea." Her chest rose once, faintly, a shallow flutter. Not dead. Not yet. Creighton hesitated, unsure whether to move her. Then he tore off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "Help! Somebody!" he shouted toward the house, though no one came. The fields were empty. He struggled to lift her, his hands slipping. The mud pulled at her like a jealous thing. Her weight seemed greater than ever, as if the storm itself had poured into her body. "Come on, ma'am," he panted. "We'll get you inside." Her lips moved faintly. A sound came out small, hoarse. "Where are they?" Creighton froze. "The men," she rasped. "Where are my carriers?" He swallowed hard. "Gone, ma'am. Must have gone for help." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. She tried to lift her head, but it fell back against the bark. "Gone," she murmured, her voice thin. "They let me fall." Creighton didn't answer. He only bent again, grunting, and managed to pull her halfway upright. Her body sagged against him, heavy as wet sand. When he finally got her to the edge of the path, he saw the first of them standing at a distance, Isaac, motionless in the mist. The two men's eyes met. Creighton's breath caught. "Help me," he called. "She's alive." Isaac didn't move. Creighton's voice rose. "For God's sake, man, help me." Isaac took one step forward, then stopped again. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held something deep and final, a quiet that had nothing to do with mercy. Behind him, Jonah and Caleb appeared, shadows through the mist. None spoke. Dorothea stirred faintly at the sound of their presence. "Bring them here," she croaked. "They'll carry me." Her words dissolved into a cough. Creighton looked from her to them, then back again. "Please," he said softly, though he no longer knew to whom he was speaking. The men didn't move. The silence between them grew until it filled the orchard, thick and endless. Dorothea tried once more to speak, but only a whisper came. "I'll have you whipped, all of you." The wind shifted, rustling the wet leaves. Isaac turned and walked away. Jonah followed, then Caleb. Their footsteps sank into the mud and faded into the distance. Creighton stood alone with her. He felt the weight of the world pressing on his chest. "You did this," he muttered under his breath. She didn't hear. Her eyes had rolled back, and her breathing was shallow, ragged. He dragged her as far as the clearing, but by the time he reached the yard, his strength was gone. He laid her in the grass near the steps of the big house. Her dress spread around her like a shroud, streaked with brown and gray. Inside, the servants had gathered quietly near the doorway. None approached. Elsie held a basin of water that trembled in her hands. "Fetch the doctor," Creighton barked. No one moved. "Now." Finally, a boy ran off toward town, barefoot through the puddles. Creighton knelt beside her again, wiping her face with a corner of his sleeve. "Stay awake, ma'am. He'll be here soon." Her eyelids fluttered. "They left me," she murmured. "Yes, ma'am, but you'll be all right." She smiled faintly, though it wasn't a smile. "No," she said. "They're gone. The roots are gone. The tree will die." Her voice cracked, and her head fell to one side. The front door creaked open behind them. Elsie stepped out, clutching a folded sheet. "For her?" she asked quietly. Creighton nodded. They covered her, but not her face. He couldn't bring himself to do that. He sat there for a long time, staring at the woman who had ruled this land like a queen, and now lay broken at the foot of her own steps. The plantation around them was silent. Even the birds had not yet returned. By midday, the doctor arrived pale, sweating, muttering as he knelt beside her. He checked her pulse, lifted her eyelid, and sighed. "She's alive," he said, "but it's bad. Likely her spine. She'll not walk again." Creighton closed his eyes. From the doorway the servants watched in stillness. The doctor packed his bag and looked around. "You'll need help moving her inside." Creighton hesitated. "They won't touch her," he said quietly. The doctor frowned. "Then do it yourself." He left soon after, his buggy wheels cutting through the wet road. It took Creighton most of the afternoon to get her inside, inch by inch, dragging her across the floorboards that once echoed her orders. He laid her on the parlor couch, propped her head on a pillow, and lit the fire. Her breathing was shallow but steady, her eyes opened once, unfocused. "Creighton," she whispered. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't let them leave." He swallowed. "They already have." Her eyes closed again. Outside, the sun began to break through the clouds, spilling thin light over the ruins of the orchard. Steam rose from the wet earth. For the first time in years, the plantation was quiet, not with labor, not with command, but with a silence that seemed almost reverent. Somewhere in the distance, Isaac paused in his walk and looked back toward the house. The smoke from the chimney rose like a thin gray thread against the sky. He turned away again, his face unreadable, and kept walking until the house disappeared behind the trees. And in the parlor of the big house, Dorothea Vance, the woman who once demanded the world bend beneath her, lay staring at the ceiling with eyes that saw nothing at all. Dawn came with a stillness that felt wrong. The usual hum of insects and distant work songs had vanished, replaced by an uneasy quiet that clung to the plantation like fog. Smoke still drifted from the burned grass near the riverbank, a faint gray line in the air. The smell of ash lingered everywhere, bitter, damp, unforgettable. Isaac stood near the slave quarters, his hands blackened with soot. The memory of the night before replayed in flashes. Dorothea's scream, the breaking of wood, the thud that silenced everything. He hadn't slept, though his body demanded it. None of them had. Martha sat beside the doorway, staring at the horizon. Her face looked carved from stone, lips pressed thin. Jonas moved restlessly, pacing the dirt, muttering to himself. Every sound, a snapped twig, a rustling leaf made them flinch. When the overseer's horse approached, a tremor ran through them all. Creighton dismounted slowly, eyes scanning the scene. His shirt was stained with sweat, and his whip hung limp at his side. "Ain't no use hiding," he said quietly. "We all saw what happened." Isaac kept his eyes on the ground. She slipped. Creighton's jaw twitched. "That what you're calling it?" "She was heavy," Jonas muttered. "The ground was wet." Creighton let the silence stretch until it hurt. Then he exhaled. "Maybe so, but the mistress is gone, and when the world learns it, they'll want blood, any blood." Martha looked up. "Yours too?" The overseer blinked. It was the first time she'd spoken directly to him. Her voice was steady, flat, fearless. "She made fools of us all," she continued. "You think the master'll spare you? You think he won't say you failed to protect her?" Creighton hesitated. The truth sat there, between them, thick and undeniable. "Finally," he said, "you listen good. Bury her where no one finds her. The colonel's away till next week. We got that long to fix this mess." Jonas spat into the dirt. "Fix it?" he whispered. "Ain't no fixing what she did." Creighton turned sharply. "You talk too much." But even his voice had lost its certainty. He looked like a man unraveling, bound to a system that was starting to rot from within. He glanced toward the main house, then back at the group. "By sundown," he ordered. "Deep, quiet." He mounted his horse and rode off without another word. When he disappeared behind the trees, the three of them stood motionless. Isaac finally spoke. He's scared. Jonas nodded slowly. Good. They gathered shovels from the shed, old splintered handles that bit into their palms. The soil near the river was soft, black from the previous night's rain. They dug in silence, sweat mixing with dirt. Every thrust of the shovel felt like the rhythm of something ending, something too big to name. After a long while, Martha straightened and whispered, "She's still heavy." Jonas gave a grim laugh, shaking his head. "Even now." Isaac stared at the body wrapped in linen, motionless in the wheelbarrow beside them. Her fan, cracked in half, lay nearby. A few pearls had rolled into the mud. He looked at her face, once pale, swollen, unrecognizable. Not a monster anymore, just flesh. When they rolled her into the shallow grave, Martha didn't look away. "No prayers?" Jonas asked quietly. "She took enough of those from us," she said. They covered her slowly, shovelful by shovelful, until the earth was smooth again. Then Martha pressed her palm flat on the dirt. "Now," she said softly, "she finally carries us." The words hung in the air, trembling like heat waves. That night, the wind changed. It carried the smell of rain again, clean, almost gentle. Inside the quarters, no one spoke, but everyone felt it. The faint pulse of something new. Not joy, not safety, just release. Creighton didn't return until morning. When he did, his eyes were red. He said nothing, only looked toward the field where the grave lay hidden among the reeds. He dismounted, stood still a long while, and whispered something Isaac couldn't hear. Then he walked back to the house and shut the door. Martha sat by the window, watching the sun rise. "You think he'll tell?" she asked. Isaac shook his head. "He's too scared of the master." Jonas smiled faintly, the first real smile Isaac had seen from him. Then maybe, fear's good for something. But deep inside, Isaac knew fear was never gone, it only changed shape. It moved through the rooms of the plantation like smoke through cracks, invisible but everywhere. They were free of Dorothea's weight, but not of the system that built her. Still, as dawn brightened and the birds began to sing again, a quiet courage settled in the room. Martha whispered, "She's gone," like testing the sound of it. Jonas closed his eyes, let out a breath that had been trapped for years. Isaac walked outside and stood barefoot in the dirt. The earth beneath him was warm, soft, alive. He looked toward the river where mist curled above the surface and thought maybe, just maybe, this land could remember something other than cruelty. He whispered to the wind, "We buried her deep." And for the first time, the silence that followed didn't feel like fear. The colonel's carriage arrived 3 days later. It was still early, the kind of morning when fog lay thick enough to hide the road, but the horses' hooves broke through the silence like gunshots. Everyone on the plantation froze. The rhythm of the wheels, the metallic clink of harness rings, they sounded heavier than usual, as if the land itself tensed for what was coming. Isaac stood by the barn, his hands trembling around the handle of a bucket. Martha was at the washing line, her fingers tightening on the wet cloth she held. Jonas, halfway through chopping wood, let the axe rest against the stump. All three exchanged the same wordless glance. "It's time." The carriage rolled to a stop before the big house. Colonel Edwin Vance stepped down, tall and lean in his grey travelling coat, his boots splattered with mud from the journey. His face was gaunt from age and whiskey, his eyes sharp despite the years. He looked around the yard, nostrils flaring as though he could already smell that something had changed. Creighton came from the porch, stiff and nervous. "Colonel," he greeted, touching the brim of his hat. "Where's Dorothea?" the colonel asked immediately. His voice carried that deep, dragging drawl that once made every servant shrink a little smaller. Creighton swallowed. She's not feeling well, sir. Resting inside." The colonel narrowed his eyes. "Resting? In the middle of the day?" Creighton forced a smile. "Doctor said she needs quiet. She took a fall down near the riverbank last week." The air went still. Isaac, standing a few yards away, felt his throat close. Martha turned back to the line, pretending to wring out a sheet. Jonas's grip on the axe tightened. The colonel's jaw flexed. "A fall," he repeated, slowly. "And nobody thought to send word?" Creighton stammered. "We didn't think it was serious, sir. She's been—" The colonel brushed past him and strode up the porch steps. The door slammed behind him. For several long minutes, the yard was nothing but silence. Then a sound came from inside, a single sharp crash, followed by a muffled shout. The slaves exchanged glances but didn't move. The walls of that house had swallowed too many screams before. One more made no difference. When the door opened again, the colonel stood framed in the sunlight, his face white as chalk. "Where is she?" he demanded. His voice cracked, the words jagged. Creighton stepped back, eyes darting toward the fields. "Sir, don't sir me," the colonel barked. "You tell me where my wife is buried, or by God." He drew the pistol from his belt. The sound of the hammer clicking back seemed to echo through every room. Isaac's heart pounded. Jonas muttered under his breath, "It's over." Martha stepped forward before anyone could stop her. "She's gone," she said clearly. She fell. The river took her. The colonel turned toward her, eyes blazing. "You calling me a fool?" "No, sir," she said steady. "Just saying what happened." Her tone, calm but firm, did something to him. He stared at her, not the way a man looks at another human being, but like one would look at a shadow that dared to speak. Then he laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You think I don't see it? You think I don't know?" He lowered the pistol, but his hand trembled. "You all hated her. Every one of you." No one answered. He pointed the gun at Creighton next. "And you worthless drunk, you let it happen. You let my wife die like an animal." Creighton raised his hands. "Colonel, please." The gun fired. The sound tore through the morning, scattering birds from the trees. Creighton collapsed against the porch post, blood spreading across his chest. He slid down slowly, eyes wide, mouth still moving soundlessly. Martha gasped. Jonas took a step forward, but Isaac caught his arm. "Don't," he whispered. The colonel stood over the body, breathing hard. "Bury him too," he said hoarsely. "Bury them both, and if any of you even think about lying to me again." He stopped, the threat unfinished, as if words had failed him. He turned, walked back into the house, and shut the door. The sound of the lock sliding into place felt final. The yard stayed still for a long while. Smoke rose from the chimney again, slow and grey. Isaac looked at Creighton's body, at the crimson stain sinking into the porchwood. Martha knelt beside him, not out of pity but out of habit, cleaning, tending, surviving. Jonas whispered, "The masters know better than she was." Isaac nodded faintly. "Maybe worse." By sunset, they had buried Creighton near the edge of the woods, beside an old oak that split in two during a storm years ago. No prayers were said. The colonel never came out again that day. Inside the house, light flickered behind the curtains. From outside, they could hear his voice talking to no one, maybe to her ghost. The sound rose and fell, angry one moment, broken the next. When night came, Isaac lay awake on his cot, listening. The cicadas had returned, their steady rhythm almost comforting. But beneath that sound was something else, a sense that the world had shifted again, heavier this time. The woman who ruled them was gone, but her shadow lingered. And now, the man who owned the land walked haunted inside her house, speaking to walls that remembered too much. Jonas whispered in the dark, "He won't stop till he finds her." Isaac closed his eyes. "Then we best make sure he never does." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, slow, low, and inevitable. The rain came hard that night, washing the fields clean, turning the red Georgia clay into rivers of mud. The storm rattled the roof of the quarters, thunder booming close enough to shake the walls. Isaac couldn't sleep. He lay on his cot, watching the flashes of lightning through the gaps in the wood, counting the seconds between light and sound. Martha sat by the doorway, rocking slowly, whispering to herself. Jonas was near the fire pit, sharpening a rusted blade, though there was nothing left to cut. The air smelled of wet earth and smoke. Outside, the colonel's house stood dark except for one dim light moving room to room. Isaac had seen it every night since the colonel returned, a lantern bobbing through the hallways, always searching, never resting. Sometimes they heard him shouting, other times praying, but lately his voice had grown quieter, stranger. Around midnight, the storm broke. The rain stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The only sound left was the steady drip from the eaves. Then came the creak of a door, slow, hesitant. Jonas turned. "You hear that?" Isaac nodded. He rose quietly, crossed to the window, and peered out. The colonel was walking toward the river, lantern in one hand, a shovel slung over his shoulder. "He's going to find her," Martha whispered. Isaac's stomach twisted. He knew the spot too well, the shallow bend where the soil had been turned. The rain had softened it. If the water had carried any of the linen loose, without another word, the three slipped out into the night. The ground was slick, the air cold. Their bare feet sank into the mud as they followed the dim light ahead. The colonel moved clumsily, stumbling once, cursing under his breath. His face, when the lantern caught it, was ghostly pale, streaked with rain and tears. He stopped at the riverbank, staring down at the ground. Then he dropped the lantern beside him and began to dig. Each thrust of the shovel made a dull, wet sound. Isaac felt his chest tighten. He could see it now, the edge of the linen wrapping, half exposed by the storm. The colonel froze. Slowly, he set the shovel down and knelt. His fingers, trembling, brushed away the mud until the shape beneath was unmistakable. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then his voice broke the silence, a low, guttural cry that rose into something inhuman. "Dorothea." He cradled the edge of the cloth like it was her hand. "They told me you fell. They told me." He stopped, his voice cracking. "No, no, you didn't fall. They killed you." He turned, eyes wild, scanning the trees. "You killed her," he shouted into the darkness. The words echoed through the fields, carried by the wind. Isaac felt the weight of them like a stone. Jonas gripped his arm, whispering, "We can't let him go back." But before they could move, the colonel's eyes locked on them. Three figures in the dark, half hidden by trees. "You," he hissed. "All of you." He grabbed the lantern, the flame flickering violently. "You think I don't know?" Martha stepped forward, her voice shaking but strong. "She fell, Colonel. You saw the ground. Liar." His pistol came up, glinting in the firelight. "You buried her like an animal." Lightning split the sky. In that moment of white brilliance, Isaac saw everything: the mud, the lantern, the open earth, the madness in the colonel's eyes. A shot rang out. The sound rolled across the river. Martha gasped, clutching her arm. The pistol smoke curled in the rain. Isaac lunged forward, tackling the colonel. They crashed into the mud, the gun skidding away. The colonel fought with surprising strength, shouting curses, spitting words that had no meaning left. Jonas grabbed his shoulders, trying to pull him off, but the man kicked, twisted, clawed. "Get the shovel!" Isaac yelled. Martha, shaking, picked it up. Her injured arm hung uselessly at her side, but with her good hand she swung once hard. The metal struck the colonel's temple with a sickening sound. He went still. The rain started again. They all froze, breathing heavy, listening to the river whisper beside them. Jonas looked at the body. "He's dead." Isaac stared down, mud dripping from his face. "Then we finish it." They dragged him to the same grave, laying him beside the wife he had come to find. The lantern light flickered weakly over both bodies, master and mistress, side by side under the same soil. Martha leaned on the shovel, trembling. "Maybe now," she whispered, "this land can breathe again." When the grave was filled, Isaac smoothed the dirt with his hands. Jonas placed a single stone on top, the same way they had done before. Then they turned and walked back toward the quarters, the storm washing away their footprints behind them. By dawn, the sky had cleared. The plantation lay silent, washed clean, though the soil by the river glistened darker than before. Isaac stood at the doorway, watching the light spread across the fields. He knew what they had done couldn't stay hidden forever, but for now, there was peace, the kind that comes only when fear and tyranny are finally buried together. Martha joined him, her bandaged arm pressed against her chest. "You think they'll send someone looking?" she asked. Isaac nodded. "They always do." Jonas appeared behind them, eyes red but steady. "Then we'll tell them the same thing she told us all those years, that some weights ain't meant to be carried." For the first time, the morning felt light. The wind moved through the fields, bending the cotton in soft, gentle waves. Somewhere, a mockingbird began to sing, the first sound of something new being born. And as the sun rose fully, its light touched the riverbank, glinting off the place where both masters slept beneath the earth, unseen, unremembered, and finally, for once, equal. The morning after the burial felt unreal. The plantation breathed differently, slower, uncertain, as though the earth itself was deciding what to do with its new freedom. The house stood silent. The curtains remained drawn. No orders came. No footsteps echoed through the halls. For the first time in memory, no one shouted names. Isaac stood at the edge of the fields, watching mist rise off the river. Every muscle in his body ached, but there was a stillness inside him that he had never known before. The air smelled of wet soil and new beginnings. Jonas came up beside him, axe resting across his shoulder. "Ain't right, is it? Feels like the world's holding its breath." Isaac nodded. "It is." Behind them, the quarters had come alive with whispers. The others knew something was different. They felt it before they dared speak it. The overseer was gone. The mistress was gone. The master, too. 3 graves lay hidden beneath the reeds, unmarked, unspoken, but every soul on that land could feel their weight lift. Martha appeared from the smokehouse, her arm still wrapped tight in cloth. She walked slower now, but her eyes burned brighter than Isaac had ever seen. "The storehouse key," she said, holding up a small brass ring. "Found it in Creighton's coat." Jonas stared at it. "You mean?" "Everything inside belongs to us now," she said simply. They walked together toward the storage shed. Inside were barrels of cornmeal, sacks of beans, dried meat, salted pork, things they had packed, measured, and carried for years, but never eaten enough of. Martha ran her fingers along the wooden crates, then turned to the others. "Feed the children first," she said, "then the old ones." A murmur of awe rippled through the room. No overseer watched them. No whip cracked to count the seconds. For the first time they ate in peace. Outside, the sky cleared to a pale blue. Smoke rose from the chimney again, but this time from their cooking fire, not from punishment. The plantation had not changed in shape, but its spirit had turned inside out. That night, they gathered in the yard. The moon was full, hanging low over the river. Martha lit a small fire in the center, its glow touching every face. Isaac looked around men and women who had lived a lifetime bent beneath the same yoke, now sitting upright, shoulders squared, their eyes meeting without fear. "We can't stay," Jonas said quietly. "They'll send someone to look, soldiers maybe, or kin." Isaac nodded. "Then we go together." "Where?" someone asked from the dark. "North," Martha said, "wherever the wind leads." Her silence followed, thick with both hope and terror. Leaving meant freedom, but it also meant the unknown. The land beyond those fields was filled with dangers of its own. Isaac poked at the fire, watching sparks climb into the night. "Maybe the world's big enough to hold what we've done," he said softly. Martha smiled faintly. "And if it ain't, we'll make room." The group began to hum. A low tune passed down through generations, the kind sung in secret when the fields were too quiet. Their voices rose slowly, trembling but beautiful, carrying through the trees and out across the water. In the big house, the windows reflected the firelight. Dust drifted through the empty parlor where portraits of the Vance family stared down in silence. On the staircase, a single shoe, Dorothea's, left from her final procession, rested where it had fallen, gathering dust. By morning, the quarters were empty. The cotton fields swayed untouched in the wind. The tools lay where they had been dropped. The house creaked and sighed as if trying to speak one last word but finding none. Down by the riverbank, the soil had settled. Grass had begun to grow over the graves, faint green blades pushing through the red clay. Birds hopped across the ground, pecking at the earth, unaware of the history buried beneath their feet. Miles away, as the sun climbed high, a line of travelers moved slowly through the forest path. Isaac leading, Martha close behind, Jonas at the rear with the children between them. They carried only what they could hold: a few sacks of food, a lantern, the clothes on their backs, and the courage of the night that had made them free. They didn't talk much. Words felt too small for what lay behind them. But when the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of magnolia and ash, Isaac looked back one last time. The smoke from the plantation was gone, replaced by the clean sky of morning. He whispered under his breath, "We carried her all our lives. Now the land can carry her instead." Martha heard him and nodded. "Let her stay there," she said. "We got places to walk." They kept moving, their footprints fading behind them on the soft, rain-soaked path. The world ahead was uncertain, but each step forward felt lighter, not because the burden had vanished, but because it had finally been shared among the living instead of the dead. By dusk, the forest opened into a wide meadow bathed in gold. The children ran ahead, laughing. Jonas raised his head to the sun, eyes closed. Martha's hand brushed Isaac's, a silent promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. As the first stars appeared, the fireflies rose from the grass, their glow weaving through the air like tiny spirits. Isaac stopped to watch them dance. In their flicker, he saw the memory of everything that had been lost and everything that might still be won. He turned to Martha. "This is where it starts," he said. She smiled faintly. "Then let it be ours." They walked on until the night swallowed them, the fireflies marking their path, small lights leading them away from the shadow of the plantation forever. And somewhere behind them, buried deep beneath the red earth of Georgia, the house of Dorothea Vance began its slow decay. The wind whistled through its empty halls, carrying a single truth through its broken windows. The ones who carried her had learned how to stand.